morning, everybody. Welcome to the Second Cup of Coffee. Pastor Tom, thank you so much for joining us. We're doing something new here at the Second Cup of Coffee. Going forward, from time to time, we'll have what's called Second Cup of Coffee Conversations. Well, I'll bring in people that I know that I think might encourage you. Sitting right here is my very dear friend, known him for a very long time, Pastor Micah Tucker. He and his wife have been great friends to Ileana and I. And great friends to the ministry here at Rancho Christian Center, have invested overseas, been with us on mission trips. We have long history together. Yeah. And anyway, Pastor Elver was sharing last week about what you represent. And when he was telling me what he was going to share, it reminded me of a story that Micah has about being in England before he was a missionary there, right? You hadn't been a missionary there yet. So visited. Kind of spying out the land there before. And it kind of ties into what we've been talking about even weeks before, Pastor Elver, about the door and how what happens sometimes is God opens a door in somebody else's life through us when we don't even realize that. So Micah has two wonderful stories. We're going to do one today, one next week, and it's really about how God used him, almost without him knowing, at least in the first story, what God was going to do, and then open the door in somebody else's life. So just give your attention to him. We may have a little conversation along the way, but I just wanted you to share that story.
Absolutely.
This one is good. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, don't miss next week. Next week is my absolute, I can say this with no question, my absolute favorite evangelism story I've ever heard. Wow. And I share it, and it's not even mine. I don't take credit for it. I don't say I was there. Yeah. I just say I know a friend who did this. But anyway, we'll get to that next week. Can you just share a little bit, kind of tell them who you are, share a little bit about what happened?
Absolutely. So yeah, my name is Micah Tucker. Have been friends with Tom and Ileana forever, and friends of RCC and RIM International Ministries. What you guys are doing is just wonderful, and the impact you're having in the nation. So I'm happy to be here. I've got a wife, 2 kids, and my son even was in the room that we're filming this in when he was in 2 and 3-year-old years and years ago. So wow. That's wonderful, full circle for me. So yeah, the story. So my wife and I raised our hand to the Lord, kind of the Isaiah, here am I, send me moment, and said, hey, Lord, we want to do something overseas. We were already missionaries in America. But the Lord made an avenue for us to go to Romania on a trip. Well, through Romania, we ended up in England, and the church there, sight unseen, volunteered to pay for our flights to Bucharest and back. Wow. And so we were staying and visiting with them during their conference that they had there in the spring. And my wife and I found ourselves with another couple at the church that we were staying with, and we were walking along the English Channel, looking over into France. It was beautiful. Wow. And we were just walking and having this wonderful kind of late afternoon, evening walk. And we came upon a scene where a young man was being beaten up really by some other kids that were older than him. And so me and the other associate pastor of that church there, we both just kind of waded into the situation as grown men and said, hey, this is not okay. And, you know, get off of him here. And you know, we were just talking to them. And I happened to have a baseball cap on. And the baseball cap said JC. It looked like a little college university hat, but it said JC, and then around it said Jesus Christ. And little did I know, Tom.
So going back to last week, you were representing, like Pastor Elver and his Dodger. It elicits a response.
Yes.
So that's what's so funny about this story. It elicits a response.
And I had no idea the response that it was going to elicit. I just put on a hat because it was windy. You know, we were going to go for a walk on the channel there. But so we're in the middle of just breaking up this fight, and all of a sudden there's probably 10 or 15 youth from like 9 years old to maybe 14 that are just kind of swirling around us. And one of them looks. It was a young lady. She looks and she says, "Jesus Christ!" She said, "This bloke thinks he's Jesus Christ." And I looked at her, and I've never had that response in my life with that hat. And I looked at her and I said, "No, but he's my brother." And I don't know if you know much about England, but they are very antagonistic to God and to belief in God. They think that the person is brainwashed or stupid to believe in God. And that has to do with a whole mess of stuff, but really Darwinism and coming out of there. And so they lost their minds. They just got outside of their heads and started screaming when I said that Jesus was my brother. So they began to hurl insults at me. They began to, some of them ran and tried to hit the hat off of my head. It was really a wild scene. And the ladies, my wife and the other lady, were kind of just back with the big eyes and what's going on here. And I was a grown man, so it wasn't really physically intimidating.
But you weren't there to do street preaching. You're
Not
there
at
walking.
all.
You're walking, looking at France with your wife, and all of a
Yes.
sudden, some kid is calling you out for your hat.
We're tourists, right? We're just tourists. And so this 10, 11-year-old girl, she's just the main protagonist. And
man.
she's screaming and cursing at me and saying all kind of foulness. I've told people I did ministry in Watts and housing projects, and known gang members in Watts would never say the things about Jesus and about me that this young lady was saying.
Wow.
I mean, looking up to heaven, daring Jesus to kill her on the spot if he was real.
11-year-old.
11-year-old girl, just hurling curses. And so I just took it. The Bible says that you're blessed if they revile you and persecute you and say all kind of evil falsely about you for his name's sake, and just tried to answer whatever coherence might come, but mostly it was just a lot of screaming and cursing and carrying on. And I wish I could say that we prayed and everybody got saved. Nothing like that happened. Eventually, the other pastor just kind of shooed them away and said, go on with you. And so I just kind of, God bless you, bless those that curse you type of thing.
Right.
And that was that, Tom.
Wow.
And we kind of said, wow, that was wild. We made sure the young man that had been beat up was okay, and we just kind of carried on with our evening.
So fast forward.
Yeah.
Was it like a year or something along
Yeah,
those
about a year later.
You're on the mission field in the church in that same general area.
Yes, that same church that we were there with had asked us to move there and become missionaries. And
So
help
they
them with some of
paid for your trip to Bucharest, which is in Romania, if you don't
Yeah.
know. You go on your mission trip, come back to the United States, then feel called to the UK.
Yep.
All right.
And so
that's
now
where you
we're
were
back
at.
there.
Yeah.
We're on staff, but as missionaries, we're not receiving any pay and volunteering. and
Missionaries don't
helping.
get paid?
Yeah, look at that. And in England we weren't allowed to work, so it's not like I could be a tent maker like Paul.
Wow.
We were completely dependent on U.S. support, but nonetheless, so we're there, and we started doing some outreach stuff in the community. And so long story short, my wife ends up with a small Bible study in our flat, in our apartment. And she just has a handful of young ladies, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of them would come once a week. And so some of them, all of them came from non-Christian background, non-church background. And so if they needed a ride to church, we would pick them up. We had a car, and somebody had given us a car at the church there. And so we'd pick them up. And so on one occasion, we picked up this young lady, and she's 12 years old or so, and comes to Rachel's Bible study, my wife. And we bring her to church, and we're in the foyer. And a lady visiting from another place in England, she said, how do you know Micah and Rachel? And we started to kind of answer for the young lady. She was kind of timid.
Right.
And as we started to answer for her, the young lady kind of raised her hand and she said, actually, I met Micah at the Lees, which was the place we were walking the year before. And as it turns out, this young lady, Jolene, who was at our Bible study, was the one who had been cursing me, had been cursing Jesus, had been looking up to heaven, daring Jesus to kill her, lightning bolt from heaven if you're real. With curse, it was
Wow.
wild, Tom. It was wild. And she then very sheepishly divulges, this is the first time that I met Micah, and we had no memory or recollection of it.
So this very same girl
Same girl.
is having a Bruce Almighty moment.
Yes.
Smite me, oh great smiter.
Yes.
I don't make jest of that,
No,
but she's standing with you in church, and she's in your wife's discipleship group 1 year later.
Yes, and coming and every week, being involved in the Lord beginning to do a work in her life. Completely non-Christian
Did she
background.
ever tell you and maybe she didn't, but what kind of, was it that moment that kind of got her thinking about God, or thinking that?
Yeah, so she said, as we had big eyes when she divulges this information, and so we asked her on the way home and get some more information. She basically said she had never met anyone in her life that really believed in God the way that I did, standing there and they're cursing and persecuting and carrying on. And she said, I'd never seen anybody that believed in God that much. And it caused questions to come in. She walked away from that going, if this bloke believes in Jesus that much, maybe there's something to it. So it began a process for her. And then, of course, we didn't know we'd end up living there and doing outreach in that same community, and she would come. And all of those things that the Lord does, right? So.
The reason I wanted Micah to share that story, and I hope you're as taken back by God as I am, and what I mean by that is only God can do that. That as Pastor Elver shared about what are you representing, you don't always know the impact when you choose to represent God.
Absolutely.
Micah may never have gone back there with Rachel on a missions trip, but she still had the question. So my guess is she would have found a church, or she would have found something. But if he hadn't been willing to help break up that fight and then stand for Jesus Christ and say, he's my brother, and this is, it opened a door in her life that says, you know what, there are people who really believe this, even to the point of being ridiculed, to the point of whatever, and it made it tangible for her. I guess what's in my heart to share with you today on this Second Cup conversation is be tangible for people with your representation of Christ, because you just don't know where it's going to lead. We love you. God bless you. Please tune in next week. You're not going to want to miss this story. It's even better than this one, if you can believe that. We'll see you next week. God bless you.